Our guest today is a civil rights leader. He introduced the American for Disabilities Act 27 years ago, along with Senator Ted Kennedy. And years later, Senator Kennedy would say, and I quote, "It was, even by my standards and terms, a big spending bill. They were going to retrofit every subway car in every part of the country and all the rest of it." Our guest today knew firsthand about the challenges of facing people with disabilities from his late brother, Frank, who was deaf at an early age. Our guest today was born in Cumming, Iowa. The population, which is about half of this room, like this half, 150. He is the son of an Iowa coal miner and a Slovenian immigrant mother. Before I introduce Senator Harkin up here, there's a brief video that will help set the stage. But before, I want you to give a round of applause to Senator Harkin, because after the video's over, he's going to come right up here. We're very honored to have you, Senator Tom Harkin. Stay seated, let it roll, and then he's going to come on up. Thank you.
One of the goals of the ADA was to change the way the world perceives disability and then reacts to it. For the first time, the Americans with Disabilities Act enshrined in federal law that disability is a natural part of the human experience and that the world needs to change a little to let us in. The Chicago disability community was very engaged with the passage of the ADA. In fact, Access Living was the Midwest organizing hub. We took our directions from the people inside the Beltway who were working on the draft language. I was the president of our National Council on Independent Living at the time, and we led a march from the Congress to the White House demanding a meeting with the administration. We got it, and that was a watershed moment in getting the administration to move forward on some of its resistance. You have to understand that the disability community had been told we'd never get this done. Here you had a group of ragtag people who couldn't walk, couldn't talk, couldn't see, really creating the most significant piece of civil rights legislation since the Civil Rights Act of 1964. We've made progress in the built environment in a lot of areas, but it's much more difficult to legislate things to change the hearts and minds of people. That work is still far from finished. When we first approached Terry Mazzani at the Chicago Community Trust with the goal of using the anniversary for change, Terry listened to us and then came back and said, "You're not thinking big enough." He understood that we need the paradigm shift that has occurred within the disability community, and frankly within the law, to now be a paradigm shift shared by everybody. And to do that, we needed everybody to be involved.
So the goal of ADA 25 is to take a look back and to look forward. A look back to celebrate the accomplishments of the first 25 years of the American Disabilities Act, primarily focused on creating new avenues of access. But the next 25 years, moving us from corrective action, doing the right thing, to looking at disability as a competitive advantage for organizations, for communities, and for our country.
This is the year to push forward opportunity, accessibility, and inclusion for people with disabilities. What will you do?
What will you do?
What will you do?
What will you do?
¿Qué va a hacer usted?
What will you do?
What will you do?
We are greater together.
Well, that was a great video. Well, thank you all for inviting me here today. I appreciate being out of Washington. I appreciate being retired out of the Senate. People ask me all the time, do you miss the Senate? I thought about it a second. I said, not really. But I miss all my colleagues and being able to do some of the things. Anyway, Board Chair Paul Green and also our President, Jay Doherty, sitting here listening to these two guys talk about the past and the Kennedys and the Irish this. And, I had to check my schedule to make sure this wasn't a delayed St. Patrick's Day celebration here today. But thank you very much for all that you've done here. Karen Tamley, also for the many years that you've been working here for the Chicago Mayor's Office and being co-chair of ADA 25 Chicago. Emily Harris, our executive director. Lynn Cutler, my friend of, let's see, should I say it? Let's see, it's been 53 years. 53 years. And you stop there. Okay, we'll stop there. When I was a young guy, I was in college, and I was working on a Senate campaign. Of course, none of us had any money at all. And the Cutler House in Waterloo was our way station, where we could always stop and get something to eat, a place to sleep, even though she was raising kids at the time, her and Hank. But it was always a place we could always stop and, like I said, have food. And if you're old enough, you could have a beer. Sometimes if you weren't old enough, you could have a beer too. But a great friend for all these years. And thanks again for inviting me here. I want to acknowledge the great work being done by ADA 25 Chicago, the steering committee. You saw Steve Pemberton, Vice President of Walgreens, and I'm going to have more to say about Walgreens. And of course, the person you saw the most in the video, a dear friend, a great champion for disability rights. And again, we go back to the early days before ADA and trying to get it passed. But I can honestly say, in the whole panoply of people that were involved in bringing the different organizations together to funnel it into this Americans with Disabilities Act, I could probably count on less than two hands the people who really, really got involved on a national effort to bring all this disparate disability community together to pass this bill. And there was none that fought harder, was more determined than Mark Abristo. None. So I thank you both for what you've done here for Access Living, but also nationally. I'm going to have to digress to little stories. You might think that the disability community is one cohesive unit. You would be wrong. Perhaps more cohesive now than it was in the past. But in the 80s, we had, every disability group had this avenue and this they wanted to go down. So we were trying to herd these cats together to get them all on one bill. And I remember one famous meeting we had in the Senate Dirksen office building. Mark was there. Bobby Silverstein was my staff person on the Disability Policy Committee, and he was really the one that putting a lot of this together. We get the applause, the staff does the work, you know how that goes. So we had this big meeting, and we were right at the point of seeing whether we could move forward with something or not. So we got all these different disability groups together in this committee room in the Dirksen building. It's about, if I remember right, late in the afternoon, 4 o'clock or something like that in the afternoon. I came in and I said, look, I've got this legislation, we're ready to go on it, but we have to have unity. We have to have it all together supporting this legislation. We can't have people riding off the range and stuff. I said, now look, we've come together a long way. I'm going to leave here. Bobby Silverstein's going to take over this meeting. Mark was there. A lot of the others were there. Justin, of course, and others. I said, look, I'm going to leave. I'm going to come back in about 2 hours. And you're either going to be unified and we're going to move ahead, or you're not, and we're going to end the whole thing right now. So I left. I came back in 2 hours, and they had settled all their differences, and we had a unified group, and that's really what moved us ahead on the Americans with Disabilities Act. So at the end of next month, on July 26th, we celebrate 25 years of the ADA. And I got to tell you, it was a great bipartisan effort. You don't hear those words much anymore today. But I mean, we worked not only across the aisle, but with the House, with people like Steny Hoyer and Steve Bartlett, a Republican from Dallas. There was, of course, in the Senate, Bob Dole and Ted Kennedy Tony Coelho from California, and members of the Bush 41 administration, people like Boyden Gray and Dick Thornburgh, and the president himself, who actually got involved in helping us move this legislation forward. You can read in what Jay Doherty's got a book there about, well, there was one or two members of the president's cabinet that didn't see eye to eye with us on this, but there were others like Boyden and Dick Thornburgh who did, and they helped pull us through. But I can still hear those closing words of President Bush when he signed the legislation. You saw that on the video. He uttered these wonderful words. He said, "Let the shameful wall of exclusion finally come tumbling down." And with that, signed the Civil Rights Act for people with disabilities. In many ways, those walls have come tumbling down. Everywhere you go, you see signs, curb cuts on the sidewalks. Almost every television program on broadcast TV is now captioned. We have video relay services for those who are deaf so they can use the phone and participate in conference calls in real time. Most books published are available in digital formats so they can be heard by people who are blind. At city corners, I don't know about Chicago, but a lot of places, traffic lights signal when the light is green so people who are blind can cross the street. Some places even have traffic lights that talk to you and tell you whether it's green or red or yellow. Our courthouses are more accessible. So are our polling places. Well, as long as we keep polling places, you get what I mean. And accessibility isn't limited just to the physical world. The ADA has pushed manufacturers to make products more accessible. Cell phones have accessibility features such as the ability to increase the font size or speak your request into the phone instead of typing. I have a 9-year-old grandson. I just came back from a week. We just had grandparents camp with a 9 and a 7-year-old. So my 9-year-old grandson, I'm on my cell phone, my iPhone. I'm typing in something. He says, "Grandpa, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm sending a message." So why don't you just say it? I said, "What do you mean? Just give me that phone." He's 9 years old. And he pushes a couple of things and starts talking into it and is printing it out. I still don't know how to do it, but I'm going to figure it out. One of these days I'll figure it out. Many of the most used websites can be read with screen readers, so people who are blind or those who have limited reading ability can navigate the World Wide Web. So let me just point out that these advances in accessibility are the benefit of the general public also. Curb cuts, we thought, well, it's people in wheelchairs. But how about people who have mothers or fathers with baby carriages, or those who are temporarily disabled by a broken bone or knee surgery or hip surgery? Buses with pistons that lower the doorway to the curb to make it easier for everyone to get on board. And captioning that allows all of us, especially some of us with hearing loss, to understand what's happening in a movie or on TV. So these are some of the great advances and benefits. Our architects, our product designers, manufacturers, businesses now think about universal design and accessibility for everyone. Cities and municipalities need to be thinking also about how they implement universal design. Accessibility in so many different ways. For example, one thing that's always stuck in my craw, we did buses, railways, but the one thing we haven't cracked in this country are taxi cabs. Why aren't taxi cabs accessible? So about 3 or 4 years ago, I was in London. I was telling Marco the story earlier. I was in London and I was going to hail a cab, and I saw a person in a wheelchair hailing a cab. Cab pulled over. The guy got out, went out, pulled a ramp down. Person in the wheelchair rolled into that cab. Guy puts the ramp in, closed the door, and takes off. I was quite amazed by this. So I hailed my own cab. I got in, and I was telling the cab driver about this. I said, "How many of those cabs are like that?" He said, "Every one." Every single cab in London is totally accessible. I was told that in Chicago it's about 2%. 160 cabs out of 7,000. New York City the same. I've been working with Mayor de Blasio in New York City. They have now set a goal in 5 years of 50% of all cabs will be fully accessible. And I can tell you, You take an accessible taxi and put up with and have a person without a disability want a cab, and they get to choose between a regular cab and one that's fully accessible. And I'll tell you, every single time they'll pick the one that's accessible. There's more room, higher headroom, easier to get in and out of. Even if they don't use the ramp on it, it's just much easier. Universal design. So I have a challenge for Chicago. Why don't you be the first in America with 100% of your taxi cabs fully accessible? And if the state has to give some tax credits or some upfront help for people that have to change over and stuff, fine, give them a better write-off, a faster tax write-off, whatever you got to do. But get them out there, and I'm telling you, it will make a tremendous difference. So you can have a competition with New York City in getting to be first. But again, we don't have full access yet. There were 4 goals of the ADA: equal opportunity, full participation, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency. On some of those, we've done pretty well. Full participation, we've done pretty well. Buildings, businesses, restaurants, theaters, sports stadiums are more accessible to people with disabilities, allowing for better participation. And since the passage of the ADA Act amendments, I'll refer to that again later, in 2008, we've been working to achieve equal opportunity. But equal opportunity means that we also have to change how we think about opportunities for all of us. Changes in attitude are more difficult than changes in law, despite how difficult it is these days to change a law. I recently saw a cartoon, which I had printed out. You can't see it from here, but it kind of says it all. It's a cartoon, and what it is, it shows, it's the front of a school. There's a lot of snow, and there's the steps going up to the school, and next to the steps is a ramp. And there's a bunch of school kids waiting to get in, and then there's a kid over here in a wheelchair, and here's the custodian shoveling the snow. The kid in the wheelchair says, "Could you please shovel the ramp?" The custodian says, "All these other kids are waiting to use the stairs. When I get through shoveling them off, then I will clear the ramp for you." The kid in the wheelchair says, "But if you shovel the ramp first, we can all get in." Think about that. So it's just, again, changes in attitude. Sometimes we can't see the solutions because we're stuck in the old ways of doing things. I'll tell you another story. Shortly after the passage of the ADA, it was in the mid-90s, I get an inquiry into my office from Dubuque, Iowa. Public schools. They are really upset with me for authoring this bill because they're going to have to spend millions of dollars in all the elementary and high schools in Dubuque to change all the drinking fountains because they weren't accessible. They're up too high. So they had gone out and hired a contractor to come in and say, how do we comply with the ADA? And he said, well, you got to lower all those down. We're going to change all the plumbing in all these schools, and a couple million, a few $1 million, which they were upset about. So I sent Bobby Silverstein, my staff guy, out to Dubuque. I said, go out and find out what this is all about. Well, he reported to me later, he went, looked at the schools, and they were very upset about all the money and the turmoil that they were going to go through to make drinking fountains accessible. So Bobby said, I tell you what, accessibility is the issue. Okay, accessibility is the issue. He said, if you'll just take at every drinking fountain and put up a little paper cup dispenser and a waste paper basket, then everybody, including kids who use wheelchairs, can come by, take a drink, and throw it in a wastebasket, and you've solved your problem. They had never thought about that. This just cost a few $100s, not millions. That's why you get stuck in the old ways of thinking. And perhaps the contractor saw some way of making money, too. I don't know about that. But sometimes the biggest challenges are right up here in how we think and how we view. People always ask me a lot, what do you think the biggest challenge was in ADA? And I said, well, the biggest challenge was changing attitudes, perceptions. Every time you see a person with a disability, the first thing that kind of comes to people's minds is what they can't do. You see someone in a wheelchair, they can't walk. You see someone who's blind, they have trouble maneuvering. You see someone who's deaf, can't hear. And on and on. I was hoping to change it so that you see a person and say, what is it you can do? What are your abilities? So many people that have physical or mental limitations can do so many magnificent things. Yet maybe they can't walk, or they can't talk right, or they have problem communicating, but there's so many things that people can do. So change it. Start thinking about what can people do, not what is it they cannot do. The biggest area of disappointment for me in these 25 years has been the last one, economic self-sufficiency. Well, independent living too. And I'll have to say more about that, but economic self-sufficiency. Just before I left the Senate, my HELP committee, which I took over after Ted Kennedy passed away, did a report. We held hearings on disability and poverty. Here's what we found. This was just last year. The rate of poverty among people with disabilities is twice that of the general population. Twice. Less than 30% of working age adults with disabilities are in the workforce. Every time you read about unemployment being, 5% now? Among young African Americans, it's 15 to 20%. You think, my God, this is awful. Think about this. Among working age adults with disabilities, unemployment is over 60%. These are people who can work and want to work and are seeking work. 60% unemployment. So again, to have true economic equality, we've got to do a better job in employment. Now, there are some signs of progress. In the past year, much to my amazement and joy, the Department of Labor's Bureau of Labor Statistics, comparing the month of May of last year to May of this year, the number of people with disabilities in the workforce rose from 4.9 million to 5.3 million. About 400,000 more people with disabilities working. Well, that's progress. And this is significant because for the last few years, we were stuck at 4.9 million. We haven't moved. And in the recent recession, for every one person who was laid off without a disability, 3 people with disabilities were laid off, 3 to 1. So we got a long way to go, again, just to catch up where we were before the recession. And we know that people with disabilities want to work. Earlier this month, the University of New Hampshire Institute on Disability released a study confirming what many of us have known for a long time. People with disabilities are striving to work. They desperately want to work. They found that 68% of working age adults with disabilities are either working, that's that 30-some%, or they're looking for work, actively looking for work. And among those who have not been able to find a job, over 70% are preparing for work by getting more education, addressing their health and wellness needs, or getting advice and help from friends and family. So people with disabilities are actively searching for jobs. But a lot of those jobs are being passed by. The people at this New Hampshire University found there are still barriers. Over 41% of the people with disabilities surveyed said they did not have the education or training to qualify for open positions. So again, we have to do a better job of job training and preparing young people for competitive employment. I don't mean sub-minimum wage employment, I mean competitive employment out there in the marketplace. So one of the last things I did before retiring, we got a new workforce investment program bill passed. Hadn't been done for, 17 years. And in it, we made a change. And now, Voc Rehab and others have, and we set aside a certain amount of money, percentage of the money, that has to go to kids who are in high school, secondary school, kids with disabilities, so they can do what? Get summer jobs, get internships, get job coaching, the things that kids without disabilities do every summer, so that kids can now had the experience of working in competitive employment, of being maybe finding a job for a summer that they think they might like, but they don't like, or they might be good at and they're not good at, so they can do something else. So that by the time they finish, they're ready to enter a competitive workforce. In the past, so many of these kids graduate, they get out of high school, and what do? They're pipelined into dead-end, sub-minimum wage jobs, and they never get out of there. They just never get out. So our goal in this bill was to say, first, and it was a challenge to young people and their families. You can't do that. From now on, you've got to go out and hit the marketplace. And we're going to provide support for you in school, give you those summer jobs, internships, job coaching. We set aside a certain part of the money to do that. But when you get out of school, you got to go out there and get a job in the marketplace. And only after a certain time and so many tries, and then getting an exemption, then you could go into some sub-minimum wage jobs, okay? In the past, that has been the first avenue. That's been the first default position, is for a kid with a disability, whether it's mental or physical or both, combination of both, to get pipelined into that sub-minimum wage job. Now it's the last thing. And the first thing is competitive employment. So, again, we're hoping that, again, job training. I also want to challenge community colleges also to become much more active in recruiting and seeking out kids with disabilities for, well, general education, or colleges, as it might be, or maybe specific types of education where they might want to get that kind of training. 36% of the people surveyed, people with disabilities, said they reported that employers assumed they could not do the job because of their disability. And get this, 25% of those surveyed reported a lack of transportation to get to work. 1 out of 4, lack of transportation. So we've made some progress since 1990, but we have a ways to go. In 1999, the Supreme Court, in one day, handed down 3 decisions called the Sutton Trilogy. And that confused employers and people with disabilities as to their rights and responsibilities under the ADA in terms of employment, and whether they would continue to be covered if they could work or not. I'm not going to get into the weeds with you on that. But it kind of stopped whatever progress we were making on employment. We didn't get it corrected until 2008. It took us 8 long years to get the ADA Act amendments up and through both houses and signed by the president. And so it's really only been since 2009 that we've had a clear path forward on the rights and responsibilities of employers and people with disabilities in the job marketplace. So we've come a long way. There are some signs of hope. The increase in workforce participation I mentioned is one sign. Part of what's made this possible is that there are some business leaders who have taken on the challenge to employ more people with disabilities. One of those businesses is based here in Chicago. It's represented by the co-chair of ADA 25 Chicago Steering Committee, Steve Pemberton of Walgreens. With the leadership of former Vice President for Distribution Randy Lewis and the former CEO of Walgreens, Greg Wasson, Walgreens became a leader in disability employment. Now, let me tell you, about 3 years ago, Greg Wasson, the head of Walgreens, invited me and some business leaders up to their distribution center outside of Hartford, Connecticut. It's one of their largest distribution centers. And this is a place where, like, if a Walgreens drugstore is out of so many toothbrushes or out of so many, they put in the order and it goes to the distribution center, and they have these little things that come by and people have stations and they fill them up and all that kind of stuff. So he invited us up. And a lot of business leaders, a lot of these high-powered Procter & Gamble and Lowe's and, oh gosh, FedEx, all comes in their private jets. I flew commercial. Anyway, up there, and so Greg Wasson said, I'm going to take you through my distribution center. And he said, first I'm going to tell you that 40% 40% of the people who work here are people with disabilities. He said, now you probably think I'm doing this out of the goodness of my heart. He said, I'm not. He said, this is my most productive distribution center in the entire United States. He said, sometimes you'll go around and you'll recognize some people who are with disabilities and some people won't. They work side by side. But he said we had to make a few changes in workstations and things like that to accommodate a person with a disability. But he said it has paid off. So he took us on this tour, this distribution center. And I remember a number of things. I remember one where they had a platform where someone had to stand and they could go up or down to accommodate a little person. Up, down, very simple mechanism. But the one that caught my attention was a workstation. There was a young woman working there who had a mental disability, I think Down syndrome, if I'm not mistaken. And she had a board. Now, usually on the board, it says so many toothbrushes, so many of this, so many of that, so many of this, 3 of this, and 5 of this, and 6 of this. She could not understand numbers. Numbers didn't mean anything to her. So they made this board. And of course, every station, you just have so many things you deal with at that station. So had this board that had maybe, I don't know, 4, 8, 12, 16, 20 different things on it, little squares. And instead of numbers, they had images. Like in one square, they had 3 alligators. Well, if there's 3 alligators there, that means you put 3 of these things in the basket. Another one had elephants. Another one had birds. Another one had all these images. She could remember those. So as that basket came by, if it had 3 elephants, she put 3 of these things. And if it had 2 of this, she put 2 of that. Never made a mistake. Once she learned it, she never made a mistake. So, again, a little accommodation like that. And as Greg Wasson said, this is my most productive center. I have more output per person hour worked. I have fewer absentees. People never get sick. They never take time off. And they're my most loyal workforce. And since that time, he committed Walgreens. He's now no longer the CEO, but committed Walgreens to a goal of 10% of all their employees in all their stores across America will be people with disabilities. That's the kind of leadership we need in the business community. And of course, Walgreens was recognized as Employer of People with Disabilities of the Year just a couple of years ago. There are other signs of hope. A partnership between the USBLN, that's the United States Business Leadership Network, and the American Association with People with Disabilities to put a focus on disability employment. I understand there's a Chicago BLN now, right, here. It's a group that helps businesses examine their disability employment efforts and increase the inclusion of people with disabilities. And so, again, we've already had our first sort of self-study on this. It's coming back. Some companies scored very high, some scored low, but at least now we have a roadmap for businesses to self-examine and see how they're doing in terms of employing and retaining employees with disabilities. Now, I mentioned a couple of other things, but I want to kind of come back to a couple. First, it's a time for celebration. We've done a lot in America. ADA has changed the face of this country. People with disabilities have many more access, much more access and opportunities than ever before. It has changed America for the better. People can participate in society in ways that were not possible before 1990. But we still have a ways to go, especially in the one area I talked about, employment. And that's why I'm glad to see so many businesses here today. So as that video said at the end, what are you going to do? What am I going to do? So I ask all of you to reflect on the achievements of the last 5 years. How can we go forward? What are the things? What are the things that you see that you might think about it, and if you ponder it, maybe we should make some changes? I'll tell you another one of my gripes. I've been losing my hearing. So I wear 2 hearing aids, and I can't understand a lot of things. Now, until lately, I didn't even go to movies any longer. I had to rent DVDs so I could get the closed captions. Now, AMC theaters, you can go to any AMC theater now. And you can go up to the window and say you're a hard of hearing person, you want the glasses. They give you these glasses. Fits over your regular glasses. And the closed captions come right across the bottom. So you can watch the movie and you have the closed captions going right across it. They're wonderful. I'll tell you how wonderful they are. The last time I used one, I didn't think about it at the time, but at my age, sometimes, those long movies, and you have a big Pepsi. Hard to sit there for 2 hours. I didn't think about this. This is a true story. I got up, so I got to go to the bathroom. So I went out. My wife was with me. I went out, and all of a sudden I realized I walked back to the men's room, and I could still follow the movie. Still coming across my glasses. Yeah, Jay, try it sometime. It works. So they're just things like that. But another gripe I have, I fly a lot. And once in a while, when I'm headed back home or something like that, I'd like to watch a movie. Last month, I was coming back from Europe. Long flight back. I'd finished my stuff. I was coming back. I wanted to watch a movie. Let's see, what airline was I on? I was on American. Coming back, and so I go through the movies. A lot of good movies I wanted to see that I haven't seen. Not one English movie was captioned. I could watch a Japanese movie with English subtitles. I could watch a French movie with English subtitles, an Italian movie, but not an English movie. Why? I have been on the airlines for over almost 3 years now to change their policy. If they can put captions up there for foreign films, why can't they do it for English films? So those of us who are hard of hearing, and we'll give you the earphones. Earphones, they say, well, you can turn up the volume. Well, again, those of us who have hearing problems know that turning up the volume doesn't really do it. Believe me, trust me, those of you that don't have hearing loss. It's the clarity. And sometimes these movies, they have people that mumble a lot. I really tried to watch Interstellar. I'm a kind of a science fiction nut. And who's that actor in that? Matthew McConaughey. After about 5 minutes, this guy is mumbling so much. I just finally quit. I'll have to get the DVD and watch it now, I guess. So it's not the volume or anything like that, it's clarity. But just a simple thing like that. Why can't airlines put captions on all their movies? Simple little things like that. Anyway, I ask you to think about how you can also be involved in this. There's so many things that in your daily life, businesses are changing. We're having universal design now. Every new building being built in America is built with universal design. Buildings. How about private homes? How about private houses? Why aren't municipal codes and building codes saying if you're going to build a house, you have to have universal design? Well, they say, well, but not too many people with disabilities can afford that house. I said, wait a second. What if I want a house, but I have friends who have disabilities and I want to invite them over to visit? I want to have them over for dinner. They can't come to my house. So don't think about it just in terms of a person with a disability owning a house. Think about those of us who have friends who have disabilities, want to invite them over. It is so simple. I challenge any architect, and I have a nephew who's an architect, and he said, I just spent some time with him. He said, you're absolutely right. Every house we build can have that universal design concept without any problem, especially single unit houses and multiple unit houses. So anyway. ADA 25 Chicago is challenging everyone, every business and government leader and nonprofits to advance these principles, new ideas, new initiatives to move ADA into the new century. I was told a little earlier that there's some budget problems in this state. Well, I don't know that. I don't know too much about your budget problems here, but I've seen it in other states too, and I've seen it at a national level too. Why is it the first thing they think about cutting are the things that go to help people with disabilities or those on the lower economic ladder achieve self-sufficiency? And especially when it comes to things that Mark has been involved in all our lifetime, independent living. We know, we have data. I can prove it to anyone with an open mind, well, decently open mind, anyway, that support services for people with disabilities to live in their own home or to live in the community is cheaper to the taxpayers than institutionalization. It's absolutely cheaper. Not to mention the quality of life and the fact that people can then make their own decisions when they're living in their own home or in their own community. So anyone that says that this is costing too much money, say, okay, you got two options then. You can either do it this way with independent living and community-based support services, or you can institutionalize, which is going to cost you a lot more money and degrade their quality of life. Or is there a third option? Just say to hell with it. Just let them go out on the street someplace. What kind of society are we? Are we not, haven't we come a long way in this country to understand that we have an obligation to one another? And we have an obligation to the future of this country. We have an obligation to the America of the next century and the century beyond to build those institutions, those structures that put us into a social network, into a network of mutual support for one another, where people with disabilities are truly able to fully participate, to have equal opportunity to everything, where they can live independently on their own, where they want to live, with their friends and their family and their community, and where people with disabilities can pursue their dreams, to have the jobs that they want to have paying jobs, not sub-minimum wage, but I mean decent, good paying jobs, to show their abilities and what they can do. To me, that's what ADA in the future means, is setting those standards down so that we don't go backward, but that we set the stage for this new, better America for the future. Thank you.
We have a couple of questions here, real quick. With that lady working that machine over there, I was going to say, you know, the time of the senator is up, but
First,
she had it right there.
Just a second, Paul. I'm going to ask this operator, what's your name? Joe Gale. Let's hear it for Joe Gale.
Absolutely.
She's doing a great job.
Magic fingers. Okay, this is going to be rapid fire, just like when you were running for president, you know, real fast, fast questions, fast answers. Okay, here we go. Little. Well, Jackie Robinson Ivy left. Good, now I can.
By the way, thank you for mentioning that I'd run for president.
Yes.
I appreciate it. Some of you may have missed it.
Yeah.
A lot of people missed it as a matter.
I won't mention the results. Okay. Nora Handler, where are you, Nora? Way in there, supporting Illinois brothers and sisters. Now that you have retired, who do you consider the champion of the people with disabilities in the House and the Senate?
Well, of course, we still have Steny Hoyer in the House, who was one of our original co-sponsors and one of our, so Steny watches out for us in the House of Representatives. I would say in the Senate, we have some. I know people in the disability community have asked me that question a lot, but there are some good people who have taken it upon themselves. I don't know that I need to single anyone out at all, but I would say some of the people that were on my committee that work so hard, people like Patty Murray, and I I say this even though I know he's running, but Bernie Sanders, it was on my committee, Elizabeth Warren, and another person on committee who's been very helpful, Mark Kirk from Illinois on the Republican side, been very helpful in these efforts. Of course, I have to be fair then, of course, who am I thinking of? Tammy Duckworth on the House side also on that. So there are quite a few. Maybe not as focused as it was on me simply because I was there at the beginning. But there are a lot of good people there. The real problem is just getting over some of that hard Tea Party right stuff. I digress a little bit. A lot of people ask me if could we pass the ADA in the Congress today? You want to know my honest answer? No. It would never pass today. We had a perfect period of time. We had a president who supported it to the hilt, President George H.W. Bush. And we had Republicans in the House and in the Senate and Democrats who worked together to get the job done. And but it never passed the Senate today, and not the House either.
Okay. We have a couple of questions, basically the same thing. I'll just, since he came first, he gave me this question before he spoke. That's called early voting in Chicago. Oh, she's putting everything down. Okay, here we go. I think, is it Mark Ishag? Is that how you, Ismag? Close enough, thresholds. Thank you for your incredible leadership, all that good stuff. Only, the ADA passed only because of bipartisanship. This is a simple question, 25 words or less, Senator. How do we restore civility to the political policy making, Just 25 words how we solve that problem.
Whoa.
You can do it.
Whoa, yeah, 25 words or less. We need more civic involvement. By the way, Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa has started the Harkin Institute on Public Policy and Civic Engagement. We need to have more civic engagement in our political discourse. We need to have more opportunities for people to have differences and to air those in a calm manner. I had a wonderful thing happen to me last night. I was at a function in Washington. I don't need to mention what it was. A guy came up to me, Fred somebody, said he'd worked for Tom Talkie, who ran against me in 1990 for the U.S. Senate. I didn't know who this guy was, but he'd worked for an opponent of mine. And he said, what I remember, he said, my guy lost, you won, but what I remember, it was a very civil campaign. And it really was. And I think you got to get more civic involvement in sponsoring debates, not partisan, just open discussions among people running for office. One of the problems I have, I suppose I'm a liberal. I'm sure that surprises all of you. But again, at least I think sometimes as liberals we always say, well, maybe I'm not always right. Maybe the other side's got some points. Well, I think the other side's got to start looking and say, well, maybe I'm not always right either. But let's meet halfway someplace.
Notice the senator calls himself a liberal. Modern day, you call yourself a progressive, because that's what cowardly liberals do. Okay. That Tolman he'll have one of those to write about. Okay, Bruce Handler, member of the City Club. Should there be a national program funded by Congress, to train first responders in recognition of crisis situations involving those with disabilities, rather than a state program?
Yes. And yes, and after Hurricane Katrina that hit New Orleans, what we found was so many people with disabilities were not, for instance, they were taken away and they had to leave their wheelchairs. Sometimes they're seeing eye dogs, and they were just ripped and put in these big arenas with everybody else, no one paying attention. So we did pass some national legislation saying that in these nationally declared emergencies, there have to be plans in place. I can't tell you if that's happen, we put that in legislation, that they have to have plans approved by FEMA for meeting the needs of a variety of different people with disabilities, deaf, blind, can't use legs, different things like that, people with intellectual disabilities. So yes, that's in national legislation.
Well, we're running on OT, so I'm just going to close it by reading Ray Campbell. Can you think of one significant thing we still need to do to complement your vision of the ADA? One thing that needs to be done. If you had to pick one thing. One thing? You didn't think this would be easy. You're in Chicago now.
Yeah, right. Well, I have to say employment. That's just one nut we haven't really cracked. We've done a little bit, but employment and job training, getting these kids ready to work in competitive employment. To me, that's the single, to me, most important thing. Work is important. Work's important to all of us. It gives us a sense of self-worth, that we're a part of our society, that we're helping making things move and grow and develop. Employment. We've just got to do a better job on employment.
Senator, before you go, this is called a sandbag. This is a city club. We have no rules, right, Dennis? You always write about our rules. Are you going to make an endorsement in the Iowa caucus for 2016? This is Chicago, where politics is,
Well, Lynn Cutler's sitting there with a Hillary 2016 button
Yeah.
on, and so I got to be careful about what I say here. But let me put it this way. My wife is already on board the Hillary Clinton campaign. Hillary had dinner at our house in Iowa in April with just a small group of us. So I'm weighing this very carefully. Well, I have made no pronouncements, but I think you can understand where my sympathies are. But I will tell you that I know the other two gentlemen running. I know Martin O'Malley very well. I've known him for a long time. Great guy. And what can I say? Bernie Sanders is one of my closest friends, both he and his wife, Jane. And I think Bernie is bringing a needed voice and dimension to my party's deliberations on what we're going to do in the future. I think he's brought us back to a sense of this social compact, the common weal, as we used to call it, the common good. And he is a powerful voice on that. And so I think he's going to have a lot to offer in terms of setting the path, sort of setting the challenges for our country and for our party, my party, as to what we're really going to stand for in this next election.
Okay, well. I know this will.
But I have to say, because you alluded to it in the opening, but I'm not making predictions on Iowa caucuses after being a Dean supporter in 2004. So I don't make any.
I'll never forget your face when he was screaming those states. You looked like you would rather be any place else. A firing squad would have been better. Well, all I can say is this is a great disappointment to somebody, what you just said, because I'm going to tell Donald Trump on Monday that you may not be endorsing him. So, how about a big round of applause for our